Hello, and thank you all for joining me again here today on Hessens County. Today's video is going to be another TTRPG Talk, this time part of our SRD series. This time we're going to be taking a look at Hints and Hijinx, created by Pandion Games. They're currently running a game jam, so you can find the creator's kit that we're going to be briefly going over, in addition to the link to the jam and all the submissions that have been put forward to that so far in the doobly-doo down below. Now, without further ado, let's take a look and see what Hints and Hijinx gives you and what type of game it's designed to create. So, Hints and Hijinx is really a solo TTRPG system that is built around the idea of creating a mystery. So you might think, something along the lines of Agatha Christie or, Sherlock Holmes, stuff like that could definitely apply. But of course, you could put it, the way it's designed, you could really combine it together with any sort of setting or genre, elements that you can think of. So far, different submissions have been like a sidekick looking for their missing superhero. They sort of like a comic theme to it. I submitted a game that was essentially inspired by a K-drama. Another person has submitted, other people have submitted games that are inspired by horror, like The Dark Tower, that sort of feeling of like a sort of Western fantasy style. Many, many different sorts of genres that you can combine it together with. Now, like a lot of other solo TTRPGs, this one is very dynamic. Well, by combining together questions, rolling tables, card drawings, and stuff like that. Those are all pretty standard, to be perfectly honest, in order to help sort of randomize the story as you write it, right? However, this one also includes different sort of elements that I would kind of describe as being more like a choose-your-own-adventure structure, and it heavily encourages player world building, partly through that sort of adventure structure that we're going to go into here in just a minute. Obviously, as I said earlier, the primary idea behind this SRD, this system, right, is to solve a mystery, right? And this is primarily done through exploratory investigation. Whenever you are creating a Hints and Hijinx game, one of the first things you're probably going to try to do is obviously create a setting, right? But once you create that setting, you're going to create a series of locations. Standard is typically 13. So normally whenever you're doing an investigation, you're going to be going to each of these locations. Whenever you go to one of these locations, you're going to be resolving a potential situation, which is typically decided by a rolling table. You're going to potentially get a clue or not, depending upon how that particular the resolution of that situation happened. And then you're going to continue going through that loop of visit new location, encounter a problem, get a clue. You keep doing that until you have gathered enough clues that you feel confident in creating a hypothesis. And we'll go into exactly what the process of creating a hypothesis is in a minute. But first, how do you resolve a situation? This game uses the full set of polyhedral dice, well, except for the d20, at least standard. And again, each of your characters is going to have two stats. One of them is going to start with a d12, and the other one's going to start with a d10. Now, during the course of play, depending upon the table there at the bottom, describes potential outcomes that you could get from a roll. So, for example, let's say I'm using the stat that uses my d12. I roll my d12 and I get a 5 on a location in order to try to resolve a problem. Then I could, if I rolled a 5, I get a success and I get a clue, right? But if I rolled a 1, instead, I get a failure with consequence, which basically means that something bad happens. I fail, and in a very bad way, right? And also, my skill is reduced. Maybe I'm becoming fatigued. Maybe I had to do something in order to prevent me from having something even worse happen to me. Maybe I'm just becoming discouraged, or something in the environment around me has made me solving this problem more difficult, and as a result, my dice is degraded. This would be very similar to those of you who've maybe watched our video talking about the breathless system or other ones that are similar to that. Where again the skills kind of degrade along the line that you'll see there, where you start from a D12 and you just work your way down the D sizes until you get to a D2, which again the creators encourage you to either utilize a coin, or of course you could just do evens and odds on any even numbered sided dice. So this is the basics of how you would resolve a situation at a location. So, for example, let's say I go to the store. My problem that I have is that the store is closed. So I have to figure out, I'm not technically allowed to go into the store. I have to figure out how to get in there and avoid the security guard, right? So one of my stats, let's just say it's maybe my 2 stats are like findy and sneaky, right? So maybe in this case, I would use my sneaky stat, and let's say that's my D10. So I roll my D10, and if I obviously get 5 or better, then I successfully evaded the mall cop or whoever and found my clue, right? Or potentially even 2 clues. Or let's say I rolled under a 4, and let's say I rolled a 3, and my D10 gets reduced to an 8. And also, I failed in a way that is basically hijinks ensue, like something typically humorous occurs, or something along those lines. Not necessarily like a really bad thing happens to me, but I fail because of maybe I made a really silly mistake or something. Like I got in, but I like knocked something over and made a lot of noise. So the security guard was trying to come and find me, but I managed to escape and get away before the security guard could like catch me. But I still failed in getting the clue because, of course, I got disrupted before I could get the clue that I might have potentially found in this location. Once we have gathered clues, which by the way are also decided on random based on a sort of like card, usually using a card deck system off of a table, we get to the deduction phase of our game. So in this case, what we do is we essentially try to create a hypothesis first by taking the different clues that we've found and the basic information that we've already decided about the clues when we found them, and try to create a story that makes sense. So that could take many different shapes. Essentially, this is kind of like Clue, in that you have like the board game Clue, obviously, in that you have your clues, you know the people who were potentially involved in the crime, but you don't know how it was done. So you're just taking all these little bits and you're kind of guessing how it is. It's just that this is a much more elaborate and involved process, similar to the board game of Clue. Another thing that's a bit different than the board game of Clue is that obviously in that game, what the mystery was is already decided before you even start the game, because the 3 little cards of like the weapon, the person, in the room are already in the little folder waiting for you at the end. And this, nothing is decided until right now. Basically, all the number of clues that you've decided to put into your hypothesis allows you to roll a certain size die, going on the opposite, going on the scale you see here, but in the opposite direction. So like if I have 1 clue, I have a D2. If I have 2 clues, I have a D4. If I have 6 clues, I'm rolling a D12, right? And then any clue I add after 6, I would then be rolling, I would be adding +1 to my roll. So like if I had 8 clues, I would roll a D12 and then add +2 to whatever I rolled. And then of course you would compare it to this chart here, which of course would look very similar because it's almost exactly identical to the other one, where again, if you roll a 1 or a 2, you fail, your guess is wrong, right? Your hypothesis is incorrect, and something really bad happens as a result of your hypothesis being wrong. So for example, let's say the Orient Express, right? Detective Perot is trying to figure out who murdered the guy on the train. Let's say he guesses wrong and it's really bad, and then somebody else ends up dying. right? And the murderer gets away. Um, a 3 or a 4 would be sort of like a failure, but it's a more like lighthearted outcome. This might be something similar to like if you were trying to solve a mystery in like let's say the Carmen San Diego games, where like the if you failed, like yeah, the person gets away, but it's not necessarily like the end of the world sort of a thing. There aren't like usually people's lives are on the line and stuff like that. If you rolled a 5 or better, then you succeed, and because you're correct. And then you sort of like wrap up the story depending upon what form of failure or success you end up getting, and then that's basically the end of the game, is resolving that final elements. So now that's sort of like the basics of how the structure of this system works. Some other things that you will obviously need to create in order to write essentially a good Hints and Hijinx game would be compelling settings and locations, obviously, right? We need to decide what our genre is going to be. We need to decide a compelling mystery that our character is trying to solve and create good, nice locations for them to take place in. So a good example of that would be sorry, I'm blanking on the name, but there's I'll put it with the name like down in the bottom of the video here somewhere so you can see it. But there's a Cold War spy mystery thriller that has recently come out that uses this system. That a lot of the locations, of course, are things you might expect, like drop-off locations in certain cities, military bases, a submarine. A number of the locations also, not only are you attempting to create these locations, but a lot of the games also include specific sort of setting and mood questions that really help you flesh out that location even more, in addition to the basic standard questions that you have for every location. The next thing we're going to need to create is our complications, the problems that we're going to need to try to solve in each of our locations on a table. The default is that this is like one of those D66 rolling tables, the 36 grid matrix table. Another thing we obviously need to create would be our clues table. These could be a wide number of things. Oftentimes, a lot of clue tables that I've seen for people who have been creating Hints and Hijinx games, this is primarily based off of a card deck, as I mentioned earlier, but a lot of them are very simple items. They're items that you would probably expect related to this mystery. Some of them are things that are a bit unusual. So again, kind of going back to the Cold War spy thriller, maybe the clue that you found is a bloodstained note, right? Or the clue that you found is like a timetable that shows flights to a specific city. Clues that you might expect related to, let's say, Waffles for Esther, which was Pandion Games' own original, I believe it was their original game that they created for Hints and Hijinx. Maybe one of the clues you'll find is, I don't know, a bent fry pan. Who knows? Could be lots of things. Finally, the last thing you need to create is a lot of story creation tools that definitely will help your player sort of flesh things out. Again, some of these are setting specific questions for each of your locations. That would be a good way to potentially do it. It's also a good idea to create a sort of short list of questions for character creation. That's a really good thing to do. So, for example, for going back to my K-drama game, some questions that I asked as part of the character creation process is, what is a skill that you have that the person leading this investigation thinks you would be really helpful with? Again, another thing that is often encouraged is to basically create a place where your players can create a map. For my game, there already was a map because it actually is set in a real location in what is today Paju City in Korea. But a lot of other games, basically they have you draw out a map as you visit locations and label them as to what the locations are. Or they give you a map that you can then add your own stuff on top of. So those are really nice and helpful things to really sort of help your player flesh out the story as they're going along instead of just needing to try and remember everything and write it down in a journal. So that was sort of the basics of Hints and Hijinx. As I mentioned, this was a sort of a game system for solo mystery games that was created by Pandion Games, and links to the the sort of creator guide SRD can be found in the description down below, in addition to a link to the jam, which should have roughly a little under 2 weeks left. I believe the current closing date for the jam is April 14th. So it's a little short, but if you're pretty committed, you can probably finish a Hints and Hijinx game by that time. There is a sort of template in the back of the creator's guide that definitely would help you when it comes to like trying to figure out what rules are important to describe for your players in detail and like language that you could use to do that with. Or like sort of like the flow structure you might want to use when actually drafting a Hints and Hijinx game. Also, I'll include down below a link to the actual like submissions page where you can see all the games that have been submitted so far. Definitely check that out. Thank you very much for joining us again today. Don't forget to rate your it purchases and have a good zone. If you would like to show your support for this channel or for the Hessens County blog, in the description down below you will find links to the channel coffee and also the itch store. Please feel free to take a look, and thank you for your support.